Yeah, here, hang on. Sorry, we're putting this event on hold for a T-shirt of a rock band named by Peter in the opening. Here,
Yes.
so this has got. Is this okay to go?
Oh,
on
you.
social media?
Oh, we can hug, whatever.
I was gonna say.
Turn and face me, Morley.
Okay.
There you go. 1, 2, 3. Gotcha.
I never thought my career would come to such undistinguished lows. This first moment of posing with a butt flapper. People have asked about, so it's a joke that happens early in the book, and literally it has been referenced every single stop of my book tour. People are obsessed with it. I have no idea why, but that's the first T-shirt I've seen. That is spectacular. Well, that's quite a greeting. What are the rest of you wearing? Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Thanks for having me here.
Well, we're happy to have you here in Dallas. It's been a while since you've come through Dallas, right?
It has been a
Are
while.
you situated right?
No, I got
Is
it.
it comfortable for the?
Yeah, there we go.
Yes. See, I switched out for a stool, so I can more comfortable.
That's good. Yeah, no, it's been a while. I think I was last year with Hellbent, which is the third in the series, at the end of which I was supposed to kill Joey Morales. I don't know if you know that.
No.
There's a scene at the. How many of you read Hellbent already? Okay, so semi-spoiler alert, but that's okay. It's book 3, if you haven't read it, you deserve to have spoiler alert. But there's a scene at the end that you can see right where she's supposed to die. And I planned that all the way through, and I got there and I just couldn't do it. I kind of fell in love with her through the writing of that book and all the nuance she brought out in Evan. I just couldn't do it. But she was supposed to die, and now she's like the number 2. He can't get rid of her. Neither of us can get rid of her.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. So, since that is a very positive note in my mind, I will go ahead and introduce you. We can move forward with the actual interview. Then.
I'm Gregg Hurwitz, by the way.
All bets would have been off at that point.
And Samantha would have intruded me. Okay. Here, wait. I'll sit down again. We'll do this all thing. I'll pretend I didn't see the butt clapper T-shirt and pause the event to take a picture, and I'll just come in. Very official, like a proper author.
I'd like to officially welcome Gregg Hurwitz, author of more than 20 different thrillers, screenplays, comic books, scripts, all sorts of different things. And here today to talk about your latest release, The Last Orphan, out of the Orphan X series. So welcome.
Thank you.
And to start off, how did you first get into writing? Let's go back to the real basics.
So my parents did not allow me to watch television when I was a child, which I thought was, a crime against humanity. And so I went to the library twice a week. I would check out a stack of books. I'd basket my hands and put my chin on top of them, and I'd walk out twice a week. I read the entire young adult section by 4th grade. I was reading Stephen King by 5th grade. I was writing mysteries and illustrating them with crayons. Willie Julie in the Case of the Buried Treasure. You might be familiar with my early work. In which nobody says anything. Everyone exclaims and retorts. It was all the active Hardy Boy verbs. And it was the only thing I ever wanted to do. In fact, I remember asking my sister, because she's a fanatical reader, when do you want to write your first book? I thought everybody who loved reading would just want to write books, because how could you not? And, of course, she's a pediatric gastroenterologist, so shows what I know. And then when I went to college, I studied English and psychology. I was really interested in that cross section, and I started my first book when I was 19 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
And studying Shakespeare, in English, how much did you pull that into your writing? How much do you think that really influences your writing nowadays?
Well, it's so funny because I got a master's in Shakespearean tragedy, mostly because I needed a very practical degree to enter the job force. My career as a novelist didn't work out. I literally have no job skills. I valet park cars so I went to fancy school undergraduate, and I came back for the summer, and everyone's like, I helped Gorbachev rebuild the economy of the post-Soviet era. They're like, what did you do this summer? I was like, I worked swinging a sledgehammer in burnt firehouses for insurance companies with prison release workers. All my jobs were and I valet parked, and then I crashed a car once in full view of a wedding of 250 people, and I just can't do anything. So, but this isn't actually a therapy session, is it? We're supposed to so Shakespeare. So people ask me, why Shakespearean tragedy? Why would you do that, and then why would you study that and then write thrillers? And what's really weird is, in hindsight, of course, what are Shakespearean tragedies about, right? They're highly structured, narrative-driven tales of lust, intrigue, and murder designed to put asses in chairs to sell out the Globe Theater night after night. And if you cut that Globe Theater in half, like if you do a dollhouse cross-section of it, it's a perfect cross-section of all of Elizabethan society. And so Shakespeare is constantly modulating humor, right? So he'll make a glancing reference to Ovid's Metamorphosis for the royalty, and then he'll make like a dick joke for the groundlings. Or in the case of this gentleman, a butt clapper. One hopes results in a bespoke t-shirt. And the other thing with Shakespeare, you know, Shakespeare didn't write a single original play, right? I mean, well, The Tempest. The Tempest is wholly original. That's the only play that's wholly original. But like, so The Merchant of Venice is based on the Jew of Malta. And so there's this immense influence, right? All the histories he took from Petrarch. And it's a very similar thing where we can see very clearly, obviously you guys love crime fiction, right? You probably read a lot of the same people that I read and love, but you see like, you know, so you have James M. Cain and Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler picked up and threaded through Robert B. Parker, picked up by Sue Grafton and Robert Crace and Michael Connelly, right? It's like we're playing with forms and stories that we're massaging and making our own, but there's certain tropes that we will stand on their head or find sense from. And so that's another thing with Shakespeare, where like he was doing these echoes of other stories, and then he was just making them his own through his own voice. And so it actually is a pretty logical study. I mean, the other thing that's really interesting with Shakespeare, and of course this goes back to the Greeks, is that the tragic flaw has to be embedded in the character, right? If it's just a thriller about bad things happening to good people, well, that's not narrative, that's life, right? That's like pancreatic cancer or an acne safe that falls in your head. And so the character has to be the one who, through the character, is what brings forth the story, right? That's the tragic flaw. And so it's very important when writing narrative or crime fiction. Part of what I hope is engaging is the fact that the story itself has to come and emerge from what's happening internally with the character and choices that the character is making. So it was a lot of stuff that made sense in hindsight, but while I was choosing to do it, I just did it like I do. I've made almost all the decisions in my life, which is from a position of I just follow things that are the most captivating and the most interesting to me. And I just loved Shakespeare, so I went on. And it was kind of a stall because I needed to finish this super bad rough draft of my first novel, and I won a fellowship to go off to England and was able to do that.
Well, in addition to the tragic flaw, one of the things that I love about the Orphan series are all of his other relationships. His past relationships that he had back in the foster home and with Jack, but then also the relationships that he has now, which is why I'm so glad that Joey is sticking around. Don't let Joey be hurt there. But also everything else with Mia and Peter. I mean, how much is that integral into the storyline also? And what are the challenges with that? So that's more than just an action thriller.
Well, so much of why I think we love reading books and seeing movies and engaging with TV is watching characters in relationship, right? First two books, Evan's more of a lone wolf, right? But I found these ways to have him be integrated into different relationships as I started to turn these cards over. But it's incredibly important to have these characters engaging with other people. And for me, the key line in the whole series, and I quote it in every book, around which for me the whole series coalesces, is when Jack picks him out of the foster home, and he's the smallest, skinniest 12-year-old kid, right? And Jack kind of had observed him. And so, you know, he says, well, I chose you because you got knocked down the most times, but that also means you got up the most times. It's kind of a embellishment of the great Floyd Patterson boxing quotation. But Jack tells Evan, he says, the hard part isn't going to be making you a killer. The hard part is keeping you human. And so as much as Evan never learned how to speak the strange language of intimacy, right? He was motherless, fatherless, raised in the foster care system, pulled out and raised in a silo as an assassin and trained kind of off the books, and then he committed all these sort of violent missions. But I think of him in a lot of ways as it's like he's Pinocchio, but he wants to be a real boy, right? And the relationships are part of that. And Joey, most specifically, I think, has opened up this avenue to his heart and to his vulnerability. But he's, you know, one of the things that I've done with Evan is he's an archetypal character like Bond or Bourne or Reacher, but he lives in the real world where we live. And, you know, we don't ever get to see James Bond go home. We never get to see Jason Bourne have like an awkward encounter in the elevator with the single mom who lives downstairs who he has chemistry with. And so that's a lot of the fun of it, is bringing Evan in where he has like a knife cut, he's bleeding out, and he gets dragged into like the HOA meeting from the, you know, annoying elderly Jewish lady who lives downstairs, who may or may not be based on my grandmother. God rest her soul. And they're like voting on the carpet pile, right? And he's got his phone on his knee, and it's like dinging him with death threats from a cartel member. And so he's got his face up to the glass, and he's looking in on the other side. And there's normal people who know how to be intimate. They know how to have relationships. He never learned that. And while he's a wolf who can hunt other wolves, and he can't have that kind of life for himself, but what he can do is he can protect for others the sort of life that he himself can never even have. And so it's this constant outsider-insider role that he's trying to navigate. And I think his struggles with that are relatable for some of us, right? Where we feel like we're living in two different movies sometimes as we're moving between work and home, or our inner life and the social life. But, you know, it's also a way of him figuring out what relationships are about. Like, what does it mean? What's the give and take? And how is that different from the black and white assassin's commandments he was raised to obey?
And some of those scenes, I mean, are you laughing while you're writing them? Because, like, the disco balls and the Velcro suits.
Like a Joey.
Right?
It's really fun. I mean, one of the things that happened with Joey when I was writing her is she brings out so many facets of Evan. And one of the things that I like, and I didn't realize necessarily that I was doing, I don't realize a lot of stuff that I'm doing consciously. It's not like, I don't write from my prefrontal cortex. When I'm writing well, I'm writing from my gut, and things are just sort of happening. But Evan's not the suavest guy like Bond, right? He's not the biggest guy like Reacher. He's not the best shot like Swagger. He has to bring the totality of who he is to a mission. He's like a Ulysses, right? He's the man of many wiles. And a big part of that is that he has subject matter experts who are better than him. Like Tommy's a better shot than him, Tommy Stojak, right? Joey's a better hacker than him. And so Evan's good in a lot of these things. But what it created for me that I didn't quite realize I was doing till I'd done it is it's really fun because he does not have a supporting cast of people who are just endlessly adoring of him, right? Who are waiting for him to sweep in and save the day. They're better than him at one thing. And so there's a lot of, I have a pretty raucous community and group of friends, and I would say that trash talking rates fairly high in the sort of communal social exchange. And so it's really fun for me to have that where like Joey's giving him a hard time and Tommy and he are going back and forth, rather than having somebody who I'm holding up as this, you know, incredible archetype to be worshipped, which makes it less fun for me, and probably for you.
We touched on some of the personal. What about some of the technical things? The engineer in me loves, like with the drones.
Are you an engineer?
Yes.
Oh
Yes,
my goodness.
Yeah. That's the day job. But those are the details that really also pull me in. So everything with the drones, and I mean, that's where I start becoming fascinated. So what level of research are you doing with each book?
I do a lot of research. I've gone up and stunt airplanes. I've snuck onto demolition ranges with SEALs to blow up cars. I've gone undercover in mind control cults. And for Orphan X, I've shot every gun Evan shoots, from Benelli combat shotguns to custom 1911s. I trained in mixed martial arts fighting. By that, I don't mean to imply I did that well. It was mostly a process of kind of introducing my face to the training mat again and again. And part of that is primarily what my job is to give the reader a front row seat to the action. And that means I need to find details and describe things in a way that are fresh. So for instance, when I was doing mixed martial arts fighting or training, there's one time that my instructor choked me out. And you know how there's a particular quality, not everyone's been punched in the face here, though some of us have, but we've been hit, we've been elbowed, we've caught a baseball or a softball in the face. There's a different quality to face pain, right, than there's pain in the rest of your body.
Yeah.
And when you're getting choked out, there's a specific kind of claustrophobia when you're in like a pinch proper chokehold that's very, very claustrophobic. And there's a different kind of terror that sets in as that's occurring. And for me, if I experience something like that, I can write about it differently instead of doing something that's more cliched, like, you know, and then everything went black, right? Like there's the usual stuff. And so what I'm always trying to do is to do enough of the research that I find my own way descriptively, and I'm not just writing from a conglomeration of other you know, books I've read and movies or TV shows I've seen, which you've all seen too. It's trying to find a way in. I'll tell you one quick story that's an example of going in. I mean, the other thing with research is I'm not there to paint by numbers and to go to researchers or subject matter experts to just find out what it is that I need to do for the book. I'm not filling in the research. I try and do all that beforehand. What you really want to do with a character is see how they think and see the world. We want to pull their mask on and view the world through their eye holes, right, when we're writing something. So for my third book was a medical thriller, and I had to interview this one hospital tech, and the only time he could interview me, or he could find the time, was while he was literally parting out a cadaver, like with a Sawzall, and sending the parts to different departments, right? So he's cutting the heads off to go to neurology, the joints are going to the orthopods, and I'm in there like with my note, I was like 22, right? And I'm like wishing I wore galoshes, right? But I'm having this interview with him, and he finishes with the body, and he walks across, and there's these two giant doors about the size of that whole bank of windows, giant metal doors, and he pulls one open, and a puff of mist comes out, and inside are 24 corpses suspended from their heads with figure 8 scissor clamps that pinch the ear canals, so their feet are swaying about this high above the floor. And the reason for that is if you store cadavers flat, they distort, and that makes them less useful to medical students, right, who need to do, who are learning anatomy. And so he grabs one by like the arm and drags it on this meat hook across the ceiling and lowers it down and starts carving it up again. So of course I thought this is the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And I had a scene in the book that I knew was coming up where he's running through like an abandoned part of the hospital at night, he's being pursued, and he needs somewhere to hide. And it was this perfect moment for me, right, to find that. But had I not gone into the interview and been willing to do it firsthand, right, I wouldn't have been open to the kind of opportunities that also emerge when you're dealing with people who are experts in a field different. So curiosity has to be the governing instinct for research, not just gathering and collecting and ramming things into a format that I already think should exist.
And which then is coming first? Are you coming up with your plot lines and these particular story points, or are you doing some of the research and thinking, man, that is really cool, and waiting until you can find that perfect plot point in the novel to put in?
It's a combination of both. I mean, I have a sense of the shape of a book. Before I start writing a book, you know those indoor rock climbing walls? Have y'all seen those?
Yeah.
So it's like I know where I have big chunky scenes, right? There's a big like ledge that's a hole in the middle of the second act, somewhere in the middle of the book. I don't know if I'm gonna get there with my left hand or my right foot, right? But I know I have enough to get me across the wall of the story. And then I start to go out and to learn more and explore more. Now with research, you need to know the whole iceberg, right? Just for the part that's gonna be up above water that goes in the book. And so to know which little details you're gonna choose, you tend to have to do a lot more research. And there's a tendency, I mean, when I was younger, I always wanted to put all the research in the book so everybody could know how smart I was and how much research I did. And because I did it, and a lot of it's difficult. But you never, as the author, want to be, the story has to be paramount, right? Not the author, not my thoughts and what makes me clever or anything else. There's a great line, it was quoted to me by Laura Lippman. I can't remember if it's her line or somebody said it to her, where somebody put too much research in a book, and she said, "Oh, darling, your research slip is showing." And it's such a great way to say that you always want to have, right, like where does it just rise up that we're hitting enough that for you I'm carrying the reader across the sort of suspension of disbelief. That's what you want to do, is just get enough that you're with me and you believe this could actually happen without turning it into a source book about an engineering source book on how drones are manufactured. Who everyone but you would enjoy.
Exactly. I have to read that stuff all the time. Not what I want to spend my spare time on. What's the coolest piece of research though that you haven't been able to put into a book yet? That you're like, man, this is just awesome.
Well, I'll tell you, the weirdest one was when I went undercover into mind control cults. And they're so insane, and it works so effectively and so easily that I had to tone down the book because my editor just wouldn't have believed if I wrote it as kind of grandly and extravagantly as it actually occurs. It just was outrageous.
And what's been the difference in your writing style in writing the Orphan X series versus some of your standalones?
Well, what I love about standalones, I love two things about standalones. One is that the question for motive is up for grabs, right? So in a series, if someone's a cop or a PI or in the military or a CIA agent, it's like, well, why did they do the mission? It's like, it's their job, right? And with standalones, what was fun is, like one of my books, it was curiosity, is the thing that motivated somebody to keep pulling on a thread and pulling on a thread, right? You can have all sorts of different motives. And the other thing that's great with the standalone is you can pick a character up wherever you want and leave them off wherever you want. And so part of why I waited a long time to write the Orphan X series, it was my 16th book. I probably thought of it around my 12th book. I was almost afraid of it. I kept kind of backburnering it and writing another book first. I wanted to really get a handle on character. At the end of the day, everything is character, right? I think of plot, people say, what's more important, plot or character? I think plot is character and motion. So what differentiates an Orphan X action scene from a Bourne scene, right? Like, how's his dialogue different from Bond's, right? You want everything to kind of accrue to that. And so, but one of the other things is I wanted stories to be able to enter through a bunch of different avenues, so that question of motive is equally open or up for grabs, right? So he has, he can answer the 1-855 to nowhere phone line, which you can call in real life and see what happens. And so calls can come in that way. He can get calls from, or he can get cases or plots can develop from the mythology of the orphan program that's been pursuing him. It can come from the people who he lives among as he's trying to kind of blend in. He lives in a penthouse. And so I wanted to also make sure that the setup in a series had a lot of room for me as somebody who really loved working in standalones to bring in different kinds of stories through different lenses that engage him with different motivations.
And how is it different writing your own character that you've created from scratch versus some of your other writing, like with the comic books, where you've taken on iconic figures like Batman?
Well, writing Batman, it's interesting. It's almost like a public trust. Batman was being written before I was born. People are going to be writing Batman after I'm dead. And so, that there are certain parameters around, right? I can't have Batman go kill a busload of nuns, right? Like there's certain parameters around what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. But by the same time, for me, I wanted to add my voice. There's a reason why they often hired me to reboot or reinvent characters. That was one of the things that I was kind of brought in for, whether that was the Punisher or Wolverine or a lot of the Rogues Gallery in Batman. And so you want to be very respectful of the character and what it means to everybody while also adding your own voice. One of the lessons I learned in Batman that was really interesting is some of the people's favorite things. They always surprise me, whether it's the butt clappers. But in Batman, one of the scenes people just loved is when I made fun of the form. Like I was aware that readers really know Batman. You know how Batman, everyone's talking to Batman and it's dark and they turn around and he's gone. Like that's a common Batman trope. So I had one scene where the city's under fire. He goes to see Commissioner Gordon. He's in the office. It's late at night. It's dark. Commissioner Gordon, they're having some whole exchange, and he goes to the window, and Commissioner Gordon's like, well, we have to get people here and here. And he pauses, and he says, oh, this is the part where I turn around and you're gone, right? And there's a silence, and then a word balloon comes in from the side and goes, nope, still here. And then he turns around, and there's this panel of him and Batman, regarding each other awkwardly. And then they both walk away. They're like, all right, then, very well. And then they exit the panel. And people just love that, because it was we have such... we're so much more pop culturally aware now, right, with readers. And so it's one of the things I learned early on, let's say if I was going to write a serial killer book, how many of you have heard of The Silence of the Lambs? Right. Everyone, right? So if I'm writing a book that's a serial killer book, I can't act as if it exists in a world where no one's heard of The Silence of the Lambs anymore, right? And with all this pop cultural awareness and engagement that we have with people, I mean, we didn't have, we have websites, there's interviews, there's social media, there's all this other stuff. And so it's always a balance of figuring out how to talk to and engage with readers who are very sophisticated now in different ways, while not getting too cute or meta or self-referential, right? But also having fun within the form. And so that's something I really have enjoyed doing with Evan. I've set up enough conventions with, do you need my help? The vodka that he drinks, that I can start to kind of make fun of and play within the form in a way that I think puts my arm around the reader and they're sort of inside this community of people who understand it, right, without getting too cute or clever about it. So that was another thing I learned from writing Batman, is that it's fun once the audience is up on something to include them with the full range of their intelligence and insight.
In addition to the difference between the characters, what about also the difference in forms? I mean, not only writing a series and books, but again with the comic books, but also scripts, screenplays. because again, fan of V, so the fact
Oh,
that
you were?
Oh yeah, the original V.
Yeah.
Oh, loved that.
Yeah.
So really curious then also being able to step into
Well,
the TV series.
So they're all different muscles, right? So I was a track athlete in college. I was a pole vaulter, right? And so one of the things is it's like all these sports are different events. If, like, let's say you're a decathlete, it helps if you're in shape overall, but you have to learn them differently. And so it's good to be in writing shape, but when you're moving from a book to a screenplay, you're moving from 400 pages of final product, right, where the author is everything, right? I'm the director, I'm the cinematographer, I'm hair and makeup, I'm costume, I'm a location scout, right? We have to do all that stuff. To all of a sudden working where there's whole crews and other people who do it. And so you go from 400 pages of final product to 110 pages with lots of white on the page, right? Something that's essentially is a recipe for a product, a recipe for a story, an invitation to collaborate. So there's a lot less room in that. Everything has to be spoken or seen, right? There's all these different parameters that come in. Then when you move to comics, you can't even roll the camera, right? So I can't show Batman punching somebody. I can either show the wind-up, I can show the point of impact, or I can show the after effect. And so you start to make these choices, right? Because it's like you're holding the camera and you get 4 to 7 snapshots per page. And there was a lot of things in that that I can weave into books too, because when I was thinking about it, comics, and sometimes the most effective thing is to end a scene before it begins, right? I've done that before with Evan Smoke, where he'll tell somebody exactly how, actually the opening of this, right? He tells a bunch of people exactly how a fight's gonna go down, right? I did this also in Out of the Dark. These cops are coming in, he's in a crowded cafe, and he's like, you don't want to arrest me, like here's what I'll do. And he describes in like impeccable detail all the choreography of what's gonna happen. And then they don't back off. And the last line he goes, so, we gonna do this? And I just end the chapter. I never show the fight scene. And 3 chapters later, the cops show up at their next, event, and they have all the matching bruises that he described 3 chapters earlier, right? So that's fun, and that's also a fun way to do a fight scene that's different, right? Where you don't have to read it. It's also very interesting to come in after something's happened. That's a great device in horror, right? To come in the aftermath of a scene, right? Where there's just like shrapnel and blood spatter, and you don't know what happened, and you're trying to get your bearings. And so it's evocative in writing, in thrillers in particular, well, in all writing really. The order of information is as important as what the information is, right? The way that those cards are turned over. And that's part of I hope, of how to hold your engagement in things, right? And so all these forms have little pieces to learn and to practice and to steal from and to borrow from.
Before turning it over to our audience for some Q&A, I want to ask you a couple of what we call our fresh fiction facts.
Okay.
So quick questions.
Got it.
What's off the top of your head? What is your most dog-eared or reread book?
Great Gatsby.
Why?
Oof. So tough. This has to be quick. So I used to read it every year, and I loved the romanticism of Fitzgerald, and I loved Jay Gatsby. He was like a hero of mine, and how he reinvented himself, and how every detail was in place. And so I read it like every year of high school, I read it every year of college, I used to read it every few years, and then I didn't read it for a gap, and I went back and read it and realized that my whole life I'd interpreted the book, like my new interpretation was 180 degrees opposite how I had always read it. And so, when you return to great works, right, you change, and they become different. I mean, one of the things that's amazing, sorry, this is now a long-winded answer. We'll get back
I shouldn't
to
have asked why. Sorry.
Beatles or Stones, right, Superman or Batman, we'll do the quick run. But it's a very intimate relationship between author and writer, because if I write a movie, everybody sees the same movie, and you can have a different reaction to it, right? Comic, everyone reads the same comic. But if I sell 1 million copies of an Orphan X book, there's 1 million different versions that play in all of your heads. It's a collaboration. The book's not complete until you read it. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do in a book is to not overtell or overshare or have too much gratuitous violence, but to kind of intimate emotion so that you're rebuilding it with your fears and desires and insecurities and hopes and dreams, right? You want to leave room for all of that. It's very collaborative. And so what's amazing is even for me as I change in my life, if I go back and revisit a great book like Great Gatsby or Crime and Punishment's another one I just reread and just blew my mind in a completely different way. We're so different. It's like you never step into the same river twice. You never read the same book twice.
What do you own a ridiculous amount of?
Bourbon.
What is a luxury item that you absolutely can't live without?
Bourbon. Vodka too. I get sent the world's best vodkas now because Evan drinks vodkas, and if I write about them, sometimes their sales go up. So I get these beautiful etched bottles, right? Like, thank you for thinking of us. I keep thinking, I'm like, damn, I should just put a Bentley in the next book. I keep raising that game.
If you were suddenly stranded on a desert island, what 3 things would you have to have? And don't say bourbon.
A complete library, the Library of Congress. Rhodesian Ridgebacks. And then it's like the perennial debate: is it sushi or is it pizza? I don't know. Like, how healthy am I feeling?
If you're a desert island, you're going to be able to get sushi anyway.
That's true. That's a
Right.
good point. Assuming I know how to fish. All right. I like a giant pizza oven with endless pizza accoutrement.
What's your favorite writing fuel?
I'm feeling slightly judged here. I do drink coffee. We'll go with coffee in the morning. But also, you know what it is, and this is going to out me as an Angelino, as a fruity Californian. But I do like drinking kombucha. But that doesn't leave
See,
this room.
that might judge.
You're going to
judge
edit that out of the
more
video.
than bourbon, right? Yeah.
The kombucha. Yeah, like midday, I'm like extra fuel, a little bit of caffeine.
How do you celebrate a new release?
By going out on tour and getting to talk to all you people. It's so great. I really enjoy touring. I mean, the travel part I'm not as fresh-faced about being on a flight a day, but showing up to events and like engaging with community and readers around books, it's great. It's the best celebration for me. I love it.
And what are you reading, writing, or listening to now?
I just read My Sister the Serial Killer, which I love. Brathwaite, she's amazing. We have her as a spotlight guest. I'm the co-president of International Thriller Writers, and she's going to be one of the spotlight guests at ITW next year. She's a Nigerian writer. It's really dark and dry. It's like a little sliver of a book, and you just read it like that. My friend David McCloskey is here. David, that's David. He wrote a book called Damascus Station that's extraordinary. It's like if you like the Le Carré Daniel Silva lane, that's it. I just read that. I was infuriated that it was his debut novel because it's so good. He should have written like a bunch of mediocre novels before writing that. And I went back. I'm rereading. How many of you have read Robert B. Parker? So the Spencer for Hire books, right? I'm going back and I'm rereading all of those, and they are so delightful. They're so great. And, again, one of those things of hindsight being 2020, Robert B. Parker really took the mystery and relocated it in the real world in a lot of ways, right? Because Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler are so elevated, or like genre elevated, right? Like they're dry and they're witty and they're clever, but they're very archetypal. Maybe that's a better way to say it. And in Spencer, right, you have a man he's dating Susan. She's a psychologist. Like she's brilliant. They have all these different discussions between them that are different. He cooks. He represents a very gentle kind of masculinity partnered with his, off broken nose, and he's a former boxer. And so he really was taking the mystery and starting to seat that in the real world. And I realized that, of course, I'm going back and rereading this because that's sort of what I'm trying to do with Orphan X, is to take a role or a character that's often considered archetypal and starting to seat him in the real world with real world issues. And he's so funny and so clever. And then I always love Megan Abbott. She's one of my favorite authors. And what am I watching? I'm waiting to watch, I'm watching The Crown, which is like, seems very easy. All you have to do is write 10 Oscar-winning scripts a year. Like, it's so good. I'm actually watching The Boys, catching up on that, which is real. That's for like the comic book nerd side of me. I liked Yellow Jackets a lot last year. Yeah, so that's keeping me busy.
And even though The Last Orphan just came out, what should we be expecting next?
No, is it The Last Orphan?
No.
Working on the next book, editing the next book now, have my head in the next book. I'm rewriting a screenplay. I had a movie come out last year called Sweet Girl on Netflix with Jason Momoa, big actioner. I co-wrote with a friend of mine called Philip Eisner, who wrote a great little horror science fiction movie, not little, a great big horror science fiction movie called Event Horizon some years back. And we're doing a rewrite right now on a screenplay for Screen Gems for James Wan's company, big horror director. And we're casting up right now another movie that we wrote, so that's been fun. And then I had a play that I did rehearsals on, and we did a staged reading. That was really fun. I'm kind of fiddling with that. And what else? Oh, I helped start a new comic book company with my editor from Marvel, who's Axel Alonso, who was the editor-in-chief of Marvel. So I wrote all my favorite characters. Comics is like the rich kid who lived up the street from you growing up, who had all the best toys, and you could go there and play with all that stuff. That's like writing for Marvel or DC. But we started a new company, and I did a couple creator-owned books. And the latest one is called NewThink, and it's a little anthology series with some of the best artists in the world. And it's kind of like Black Mirror meets The Twilight Zone. There are these 5 individual stories about kind of tech addiction and polarization and the insanity of technology in our world that's so crazy that I talk about the present tense as if it's science fiction. And that was really fun. It was writing like frame-breaking stories. And that's called NewThink from AWA. And then I just got back, I helped write the opening to the World Cup ceremony in Qatar, and that was amazing.
Oh, wow.
It was an incredible experience. And so, yeah, stuff like that.
Questions from the audience?
Yeah, we have about time for 2 questions, and then we can do a lot more questions one-on-one with the signings.
I think so. Here, I'll go. So I am a huge nerd with the Orphan X. Like she turned me on to you like a year ago, and I plowed through all your books. Well, not all, the Orphan X books. So I've been on IMDb. I like refresh it every second for edit. What really happened with that?
So I adapted the first Orphan X book a year before it came out. I only sent to one actor. I sent to Bradley Cooper, adapted it for him because I thought he was the best range of that human versus the archetypal between American Sniper, Silver Linings Playbook. Really good process with development, and then basically he went on, and I lost him to A Star Is Born because he wrote, directed, produced, and starred, right? And so Warner Brothers, I had like Will Smith attached for 30 seconds. Like it's one of those things where you're like scrambling trying to figure it out. Got the rights back, did a bunch of it trying to set up for TV, had a lot of different attachments flying in and out. Same thing, kind of COVID hit. I just got all the rights back to everything, and I'm just sitting on them. And one of the things that I realized was in both of the earlier instances, I was trying to adapt. I adapted it myself, right? And I wound up co-writing a pilot with David Kolstad, who created the John Wick movies, which was really fun. We had a great package. But what I realized was early on in the series, when I was doing this, I'd only written Orphan X, then Orphan X and the Nowhere Man, then Orphan X and the Nowhere Man and Hellbent. But now I've gotten to the point that I'm so many books in to reset it. Let's say it's for a TV show. Let's say I'm doing like a Netflix 10 or a Streamers 8 or 10. To keep track of that alternate universe now, to say, well, we'll use the plot from Hellbent, but I need to reset the characters from Orphan X, but there's some really key character stuff I need to pull in from Out of the Dark. I can't keep track of these 2 parallel universes anymore. And so one of the reasons why I've been sitting on it is I need to wait for somebody who is a creator, either a director or showrunner, who like really understands the DNA of the character, who I can then just hand it off to and then be there as an executive producer, as like a database to plug in. But that's gonna take a lot of trust now that I don't wanna do it myself. And so I'm waiting to make sure it's the right combination, because if you cast something wrong, you never hear about it. You never hear the end of it.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's what's going on there.
One more.
Okay, well, what's your cameo going?
I have a cameo in my first movie, which is called The Book of Henry, which you can find me. I don't know, maybe I should be the guy like who walks into the bar where Evan just goes like whoosh, like the Steven Seagal and get knocked out.
That's awesome.
I don't know what it should be. Maybe I'll be the bartender somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Dean Koontz too, and his Jane Hawk series is like, I just can't get enough of Evan and Jane. I would love to see them be in a book together. Ditch Mia.
Is
Get
that what's
together with
happening?
Jane.
So you're like a Yenta and a mergers and acquisitions expert.
Yeah.
Just all combined in one.
Do you have a dream writers collaboration that you'd like to do?
Not on the novel. Novels are so personal, right? I mean, I have writers who I admire immensely, of course, but yeah, it's weird when I don't want someone getting in my manuscript.
All right. Well, I want to make sure that everyone gets one-on-one time, and I just wanted to give Gregg here another round of applause. We have a couple extra copies still for sale, and we will have him sign over here. And so if y'all could make the line, starting here, trailing back that way, and then you can exit that way. And thank you guys for coming out.
Those were great questions.
Yeah.